Art has the power to captivate, heal, and transform. As human beings, we have always sought ways to express our most profound emotions, spiritual yearnings, and conceptual ideas through visual means. From the earliest cave paintings to the digital art of the contemporary era, creativity has manifested in myriad forms. Among these forms, minimalism and abstract art have emerged as significant movements that challenge our conventional assumptions about what art can and should be. At first glance, these movements might appear simplistic or unapproachable. After all, a single coloured canvas or a sparse white-walled installation might leave the casual onlooker wondering, is this really art? And how does it affect me on a psychological or emotional level? Yet minimalism and abstract art have proven to be remarkably profound, not only in art historical terms but also in their psychological impact. In many ways, this is precisely because of their seemingly emptied-out quality. Reducing forms, colours and lines to their bare essentials can paradoxically create an emotional intensity that more literal or representational art might struggle to achieve. The viewer is confronted with something elemental, something that demands introspection and imaginative interpretation. This encounter can evoke emotional and mental states ranging from tranquility to unease, from serenity to exhilaration, from boredom to awe. Where does psychology come in? The human mind is deeply affected by colour, shape, form, and even the expanses of negative space. We process visual information to make sense of our environment, and this sense-making is not purely intellectual, it is also emotional and physiological. Minimalist and abstract art tap into this core visual processing in ways that figurative or narrative art may not. Our brains respond to harmony or dissonance in colour, to repetitive or unpredictable forms, and to spaces that can feel liberating or confining. Understanding these responses involves delving into areas of psychology that study sensation, perception, emotion regulation, and meaning-making. Abstract art, as a formal movement, gained momentum in the early 20th century. However, abstraction in art is not a novel concept. Historically, certain ancient art forms, like Islamic geometry or the mosaic patterns found in Byzantine churches, already contained abstract elements, even if their creators did not conceptualize them as abstract art. Nonetheless, the surge of modern abstract art can be traced to innovators like Wassily Kandinsky, Kazimir Malevich, and Piet Mondrian, who strive to break free from the shackles of representation. Their experiments were born of a desire to use line, shape, and colour to convey spiritual or emotional realities that could not be depicted through figurative painting alone. Kandinsky, for instance, believed that colour and shape had an inner resonance and a near-musical quality. He wrote extensively about how certain hues could evoke particular emotional states, and he likened the composition of a painting to a symphony where each visual element played a part in eliciting a psychological reaction. Malevich took the concept even further with his suprematist works, reducing forms to basic geometries like squares, circles, and lines, aiming to achieve a spiritual purity. This break from realism was as much philosophical as it was aesthetic. Artists were chasing the intangible essence of emotional or spiritual truth. 2.2 Emergence of Minimalism. Minimalism, as a distinct movement, crystallized in the 1960s and 1970s, largely in the United States. Major figures like Donald Judd, Agnes Martin, and Carl Andre championed a new aesthetic that placed emphasis on literal space, simplified forms, and the absence of personal expression or storytelling. In a sense, minimalism was a response to the fervent emotionalism of abstract expressionism. While the abstract expressionists such as Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko poured personal emotion onto the canvas, the minimalists strove to strip emotion from the work, focusing instead on the pure objectness of art. This radical shift was as much political and social as it was artistic, reflecting a cultural climate interested in clarity, logic, and a reaction to the tumult of the preceding decades. Where abstract art tended to focus on representing intangible ideas through non-representational means, minimalism pushed even further, stressing the literal presence of the art object, unburdened by metaphor. Sculpture became a critical medium for the minimalists, as it allowed them to control space, and encourage viewers to experience the physicality of the artwork itself. This emphasis on space, volume, and the interplay between the viewer and the art object forms a core principle of minimalism, laying the groundwork for the psychological engagement many viewers feel, whether that engagement is awe, confusion, or serene contemplation. Both movements have shaped not only the trajectory of modern and contemporary art, but also our broader visual culture, influencing everything from corporate branding to home decor. They have faced criticisms, some valid, some misinformed, and yet they continue to spark passionate debate and deep contemplation. Their power lies in the tension between presence and absence, form and void, colour and neutrality. In that tension we encounter ourselves, our hopes, our anxieties, our capacity for awe, and our ceaseless drive to find connection and meaning in the world around us. Ultimately, the power of minimalism and abstract art lies in their ability to make us pause and reflect, to see colour not just as pigment but as emotional wave, to interpret a square not just as geometry but as an invitation to contemplate harmony, and to experience space not as emptiness but as possibility. In doing so, they speak to universal psychological truths about how we perceive, how we feel, and how we find resonance and transcendence in even the simplest of forms. Through these artistic expressions, we rediscover the timeless human capacity for wonder, empathy, and profound emotional depth. Minimalism, in essence, is guided by the mantra, less is more. It strips away extraneous detail, focusing on simplicity, repetition, and the interplay of form and space. The forms are often geometric and stark, the colours monochromatic or limited, and the surfaces clean. The overarching aim is to remove distractions so that the viewer can tune into the raw physical presence of the artwork, often heightening awareness of oneself and the environment. Key elements of minimalism include simplicity of form. Minimalist art typically favours basic shapes, squares, rectangles, circles, or repeated lines. Complexity, if any, arises from how these elements are presented in space. Limited colour palette. Minimalists may use colour, but they often limit it to a monochrome scheme or a single accent hue. The objective is to draw attention not to the variety of colours but to the form and spatial context. Emphasis on materials. Often the material itself, steel, wood, glass or fabric, becomes a focus. The texture, weight and sheen of the material are part of the art's experience. Spatial context. Minimalism is about site specificity at times. The viewer's interaction, movement around, and perception of the artwork in real space is paramount. Why is minimalism psychologically potent despite its simplicity? One reason lies in the concept of negative space, an idea borrowed from design and architecture. Negative space or empty space is not merely an absence, it can provide breathing room for the eye and the mind. In an art composition, negative space helps highlight the central form. In a psychological sense, it can induce feelings of calm, clarity, and even introspection, as the viewer is left to contemplate what is not there as much as what is. When confronted with a minimalist painting that might be just a white canvas with slight grid lines, as in Agnes Martin's work, the mind has to slow down. The human brain is wired to look for patterns, and when those patterns are subtle, the viewer's observation becomes more acute. This heightened, almost meditative awareness can trigger mindfulness, a state recognized in psychology for its benefits in stress reduction and emotional regulation. Minimalist spaces and art have also been linked to reduced cognitive load. In everyday life, we are bombarded with stimuli, from traffic lights and billboards to smartphone notifications. Minimalist art, in its restrained aesthetic, provides a visual and psychological palate cleanser. Studies in environmental psychology suggest that decluttered environments reduce anxiety and promote a sense of well-being. Translating this principle into art, minimalist pieces can elicit a similar effect, giving the viewer a sense of order and tranquility. Whereas minimalism attempts to pare down, abstract art tends to expand, though not necessarily in terms of visual complexity. It expands in the sense that it frees art from literal representation or narrative constraints. An abstract work might consist of swirling colours, bold brushstrokes, or layered geometric shapes that hint at deeper emotions or conceptual frameworks. Abstract art can be biomorphic, geometric, gestural, or colour field based, each style offering different psychological resonances. Biomorphic. Abstraction. uses shapes reminiscent of living organisms, evoking the fluidity of nature and the subconscious. Geometric abstraction focuses on lines, angles, and shapes, often producing a sense of order or, alternately, dynamic tension when the geometry is disrupted. Gestural abstraction emphasizes brushstrokes or the physical act of painting, giving the work an energetic, spontaneous quality. Color field painting employs large expanses of color to elicit an emotional or contemplative response. Wassily Kandinsky, one of the founding fathers of modern abstract art, posited that the driving force behind creating abstract works is an inner necessity, a compulsion to express something intangible, something that cannot be adequately rendered in representational form. This aligns with modern psychological ideas about creativity and self-expression. People are often driven to create because they sense an internal force or emotion that demands outward manifestation. Abstract art, in its refusal to be pinned down to a recognizable subject, mirrors the often ineffable nature of feelings, dreams, and the subconscious. When it comes to the viewer, the experience of engaging with abstract art can be equally expansive. With fewer visual cues that tie the artwork to reality, the viewer's imagination must supply context or meaning. This phenomenon has been studied in psychology of perception, particularly under the concept of apophenia, the tendency for people to perceive patterns or connections in random or meaningless data. Abstract art capitalizes on this innate human inclination, allowing for a myriad of interpretations. While apophenia can sometimes lead to conspiracy theories, both minimalism and abstract art pivot around fundamental aspects of sensation and perception, how we see, interpret, and respond to visual stimuli. Neuropsychology tells us that the brain processes edges, contrasts, and motion before constructing more complex images. This is why minimalist works, which often feature stark contrasts or repeated forms, can captivate our baseline perceptual systems. Similarly, abstract works tap into the brain's inherent need to find coherence, engaging areas that deal with pattern recognition. In psychology, ambiguity can be simultaneously compelling and disquieting. Artwork that does not offer a literal story or identifiable subject compels the mind to keep searching, a phenomenon sometimes described as a perceptual puzzle. If the artwork is too ambiguous, it can lead to discomfort. If it is too literal, it may become dull. Minimalism and abstract art often strike a balance where the ambiguity is enough to engage the viewer, but not so opaque as to frustrate them, although some viewers do indeed get frustrated. This tension can heighten emotional responses. Several forms of abstract art, especially those linked to the abstract expressionist movement, rely on spontaneous, vigorous strokes and intense colour combinations to depict raw emotion. Psychological studies on emotional contagion suggest that the energy and emotional tone embedded in a piece of art can be felt by the viewer, almost like catching someone else's mood. This is why a red splattered canvas might evoke excitement or anger, while a pastel wash of blues and greens might soothe the viewer. Minimalism, on the other hand, often facilitates emotional regulation by minimizing external stimuli, akin to stepping into a serene environment. For people experiencing sensory overload or high stress, encountering minimalist art can serve as a calming influence. By offering a space that is visually quiet, it allows emotional energy to settle, often leading to clarity and a subdued heart rate, effects that have been observed in clinical studies measuring physiological responses to art. Colour theory is vital in understanding how minimalism and abstract art create emotional depth. Colours are not merely aesthetic choices, they are wavelengths of light that our brain interprets in ways closely tied to emotion. In psychology, colour is often linked to certain moods. Red, associated with passion, energy, and sometimes anger. Blue, linked to calmness, introspection, or sadness. Yellow, conveys optimism, warmth, and sometimes anxiety when too intense. Green, often related to growth, stability, and nature. Black, can denote sophistication, mystery, or mourning. White suggests purity, clarity, and emptiness. Although these associations can vary culturally and individually, they do highlight the potent interplay between colour and emotion. A seminal example of how colour alone can generate emotional experience can be found in the works of Mark Rothko. Rothko's large canvases consist of hazy, rectangular fields of colour stacked atop each other. He aimed to create an experience in which the viewer is enveloped by the colour. Rothko believed that by removing figurative imagery, the pure essence of emotion could be conveyed more directly. Many viewers report experiencing strong reactions, sometimes awe, sometimes despair when standing close to a Rothko painting, enveloped by the colour fields. Psychologically, these colour fields may provoke emotional resonance by tapping into primal emotional states. One might describe the experience as akin to standing in front of a vast sky at twilight, where you feel both a sense of wonder and a tinge of existential solitude. This encapsulates how abstract art can bypass cognitive filters that usually direct how we interpret images and instead communicate directly with deeper emotional centres. Minimalists often use minimal colour, but even the absence of vivid hue can be a statement. Agnes Martin's gentle pastel stripes, for instance, have a subtle, understated colour palette that often conjures feelings of serenity. In a world saturated with loud visuals, the quietness of such work can be refreshing, akin to a mental palette cleanser. This effect underscores an interesting dichotomy. The emotional depth found in colour can be as profound in its softness as in its intensity. Geometric forms in art, circles, squares, triangles, carry symbolic weight. Circles often suggest unity and wholeness, while squares and rectangles can imply stability and order. Psychological research indicates that humans are naturally drawn to symmetrical patterns. Symmetry can evoke a sense of balance or harmony, potentially explaining why many minimalist pieces that rely on geometric repetition feel soothing. Abstract art, particularly gestural abstraction, employs organic shapes and fluid lines to convey a sense of movement. These swirling lines and shapes might resonate with the viewer's internal sense of energy or flow. In psychological terms, fluid, rounded forms are often considered more comforting than sharp angles, possibly rooted in evolutionary preferences. Sharp angles in nature often signal danger, while curves suggest safety or nurturance. Minimalism frequently plays with negative space, but even in abstract art, the deliberate spacing of shapes and colours can create dynamic tension or harmonious balance. Spatial arrangement influences how the eye travels across the artwork, guiding the viewer's experience and emotional reaction. A cluster of elements on one side of a canvas might generate a feeling of imbalance or anticipation, whereas a balanced distribution can feel more resolved, influencing levels of comfort or discomfort. Emotional depth often arises from contrasts: colour contrast, light versus dark; form contrast, sharp angles versus soft curves; or conceptual contrast, chaos versus order. Abstract art, leveraging bold strokes of black on a white canvas, can feel jarring yet profound. Minimalist works contrasting polished metal sculptures with raw concrete environments can similarly stir complex emotional states. These juxtapositions engage the brain in resolving tension, which can be a potent source of psychological engagement. While some might dismiss minimalist or abstract pieces as too simplistic, many viewers describe experiences of awe when confronted by vast canvases of colour or monumental minimalist sculptures. Awe is a unique emotion that blends wonder, amazement, and a sense of smallness in the face of something greater. Psychologically, experiences of awe can expand one's sense of time, increase feelings of generosity, and even alter perceptions of self. Art forms that challenge normal visual processing or evoke a sense of the infinite, through sheer scale or radical simplicity, can powerfully induce awe. In modern therapy contexts, particularly in art therapy or mindfulness-based interventions, minimalistic imagery is sometimes used to help patients focus on the present moment. Repetitive geometric patterns or softly shifting colour fields can anchor attention, reducing rumination and anxiety. By intentionally confronting the viewer with fewer visual elements, minimalist and abstract art invite a form of mindful observation. The mind lingers on subtle shifts in texture, minute variations in hue, or the interplay of shapes in a seemingly empty space. Agnes Martin's work serves as an excellent illustration of how minimalism and delicate abstraction can merge to evoke emotional nuance. Often featuring faint hand-drawn lines on softly painted backgrounds, Martin's canvases encourage slow, careful looking. The lines are not perfect. Slight waviness or variations in paint application underscore the human touch behind what appears initially as a rigid grid. Psychologically, this human element fosters empathy in the viewer, bridging the gap between stark geometry and tender vulnerability. Rothko's name is almost synonymous with emotional depth in colour-filled painting. Many people who encounter his expansive blocks of colour in person describe profound, even spiritual experiences. Rothko carefully layered paints to achieve glowing, flickering boundaries, creating the visual illusion of depth and luminosity. He believed these paintings could convey basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and more, without ever depicting a recognizable figure or scene. Donald Judd epitomizes the severe geometric approach of minimalism. His works, often simple, repeated boxes or stacks, take on a surprising power when viewed in person. The repetition and industrial materials can feel impersonal at first, yet they frequently incite a paradoxical sense of calm and reflection. The precise arrangement of these boxes in space controls how you walk around them, effectively choreographing an experience of the artwork that is physical, visual, and psychological. Although not widely recognized until decades after her death, Hilma af Klint was a pioneer of abstraction well before Kandinsky. Her large, colourful, and often symmetrical paintings were deeply spiritual. She believed they were guided by higher forces and were intended to convey mystical truths. Her example highlights how abstraction can serve as a conduit for transcendent or mystical experiences, underlining the deep psychological and potentially spiritual impact such art can have. Minimalism and abstract art have filtered into broader cultural spheres, such as interior design, graphic design, and architecture. The trend towards sleek, uncluttered living and working spaces reflects minimalist principles. People are increasingly recognizing that overstimulation in one's environment can contribute to stress. Abstract art, meanwhile, is visible in contemporary brand logos and product packaging, leveraging color and form to create immediate emotional impact without over-reliance on descriptive imagery. Individuals seeking to cultivate calm in their personal environments often turn to minimalist or abstract artworks as a focal points for meditation or relaxation. A single piece of art, perhaps a large subdued canvas, can become a visual anchor, encouraging a break from the barrage of stimuli that marks modern life. This ties back to psychological concepts around mindfulness and cognitive load. The simpler the visual field, the more mental resources one can free up for introspection, creativity, or stress relief. On a more individual level, the ethos of less is more resonates beyond art, influencing fashion and lifestyle choices. Capsule wardrobes, minimalist home interiors, and an emphasis on quality over quantity all mirror the basic principles of minimalism in the art world. People often report feeling a greater sense of emotional well-being when they reduce clutter, both physically and psychologically. Similarly, those drawn to abstraction may enjoy the freedom of expressing themselves without confining their identity to a single narrative or style. Critics of minimalism and abstract art often argue that these forms are inaccessible or even elitist. The phrase "my child could paint that" is a common refrain aimed at abstract workers that appear simplistic. Minimalist sculptures and installations can be dismissed as lacking emotional skill. This controversy touches on deeper issues of education, class, and the role of art in society. The more one understands the theoretical underpinnings and historical context, the more one may appreciate the nuances of these movements. However, this does not negate the fact that many viewers feel alienated or underwhelmed by artworks that do not present an obvious subject or story. Another criticism targets how minimalism, in particular, has been co-opted by consumer culture. Clean lines and empty spaces can be found in luxury boutiques and tech company headquarters, sometimes suggesting that the aesthetic's original radical intent has been diluted into a mere marketing strategy. This ties back to the psychological power of minimalistic design. Corporations may deploy it to project an image of sophistication, calm, and rational efficiency, whether or not those values truly reflect their ethical or operational reality. While some find deep emotional resonance in abstract and minimalist works, others experience emotional disconnection. The range of responses underscores the subjective nature of art appreciation. Some people are moved to tears by a Rothko painting, others feel nothing. Minimalist sculpture may evoke a zen-like calm in certain viewers, while inciting boredom or confusion in others. This variability highlights how psychological responses to art are deeply personal, influenced by individual backgrounds, mood states, and open-mindedness toward non-representational expression. When encountering a piece of minimalist or abstract art, resist the urge to dismiss it immediately. Instead, slow down. Notice your immediate emotional reaction. Do you feel calm, intrigued, restless, or puzzled? Pay attention to the details, the texture of the paint, the transitions between colours, the specific geometry of the shapes. Sometimes allowing yourself the time and mental space to engage with the work reveals subtleties that can deepen your appreciation. Although art should not require an advanced degree to be appreciated, learning about the artist's intent, the historical context, and the movement's philosophical underpinnings can significantly enhance your experience. Understanding how minimalism arose as a critique of abstract expressionism, or how early abstract artists were exploring spiritual dimensions, can add layers of meaning that enrich the viewing experience. One of the beauties of abstract art is that, devoid of explicit representation, it opens the door to personal associations. A splash of blue might remind you of childhood summers at the beach. A repeated grid might bring to mind city blocks, or a sense of order in an otherwise chaotic life. Taking the time to introspect about these personal connections can make the artwork not only comprehensible but emotionally resonant. Discuss your reactions with others, friends, family, or even strangers in a gallery. Hearing different perspectives can broaden your understanding of a piece's emotional impact. You may discover that your initial interpretation aligns with someone else's, or that it diverges in interesting ways, underscoring how art interacts with individual worldviews and experiences.